Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Creative Mind. Another episode today talking about marketing and journalism and how those things cross over. Never thought about that. Stuart, hey, welcome to the show again.
Hi, Flavio. Thanks for having me again. It's going to be interesting this time around to take a different perspective on marketing out for the lens of a journalist and the journalist perspective on creating content. And as we've sort of seen in the past, there's obviously a lot of parallels. Content is a big part of any person's marketing program. And journalism is about telling stories. It's about finding all those pieces of information and then bringing them together in a really good form that people want to consume. So it's going to be great talking to our guest today and finding out what she can tell us about this topic.
And so this is a good time to introduce Shaheen Samavati with us today. And she has a background in journalism. She's doing marketing. I think this is really fantastic to have you on board. Welcome to the program, Shaheen.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Flavio. Excited to be here.
All right. So you are a journalist and you're doing marketing. How did you get from one to another?
Well, I like to say that I'm still a journalist at heart. I don't really practice journalism anymore, but I still definitely have a journalist mentality and it's carried across everything I do. So I'm from the US, by the way, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and I used to work at the daily newspaper there in Cleveland called The Plain Dealer. That was my last job before I took a leave of absence to come to Spain, and that leave of absence ended up getting extended, and I decided to actually just stay here. I've been in Spain for the past decade. And I've done a lot of different things in marketing and communications in my time in Spain, working in corporate communication in the energy sector, later in marketing at a real estate startup. And 5 years ago, I started my own agency, which is called VeraContent, and that's what I'm doing now.
Indeed. And you have also a large community of marketers around you that you have built. And that is, in fact, the heart of the topic today is journalists by trade work with many sources. They have to verify that those sources are accurate. They have to keep those sources also, I would say, in the network. And marketers are very much doing the same, except they do that inside the company they work for, positioning products or content, working with PR agencies and connecting the worlds, which is very much what journalists do. But interesting enough, when I read job offers for marketers, no one really talks about journalism. They talk about storytelling now a little more, which we had an episode about. But journalism is not there yet. Do we think that, are marketers journalists?
Well, I think there's a lot of different terms being used for skills, for journalism skills, I would say. So a lot of times a marketing job might not specifically ask for journalism experience, but it's looking for skills that journalists often have. And I think that people who have journalism experience have an advantage when looking for, especially those more creative marketing roles, content marketing, especially, which is what I'm specialized in. Obviously the crossover is the storytelling, the interviewing, the, that aspect of getting across information. So
what sort of things did you learn when I think you studied journalism, didn't you, when you were in the US? What sorts of aspects of studying journalism and that trade can somebody take with them to the world of marketing?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad I studied journalism because I think a lot of, in general, just as life skills, I think there's a lot of really practical things that you learn in journalism school. And well, also just working in journalism as well. I'd say I learned even more on the job than I did in university, for sure.
I think we all do.
Indeed.
In those first journalism jobs, I would say it's where I give the most credit. But but that organizing information, I think, is super a really important thing. Sourcing, like Flavio was kind of alluding to, and but yeah, and being just concise in communication in general, I think is just a huge asset that's helped me in every aspect of my career. Now that my job is actually more business management than it is actual writing, but all of those things still help me in everything I do, basically. So
I think the interesting part for me when I think about journalism is, like you said, organizing the media, but also figuring out exactly what is the essence of the message that one wants to position. And this is what we're talking constantly in marketing, right? I mean, if you launch a program or a service or a product, figuring out exactly the audience that you have and what is it that is going to make that audience be interested into whatever you're going to talk about. And I think, to me, it never really came across the discussion until connecting with you, Shaheen, is the fact that marketers have the same skill set as journalists from that standpoint. Obviously, it is turned in much more into a commercial way. Maybe journalism is more turned into a information way, but
Yeah.
the essence is the base is the same.
Well, I think like maybe now ideas about this are starting to change, but definitely when I first started in journalism, a journalist would never say that they have anything to do with marketing. Like they are totally different fields, totally different objectives, you know, and philosophies behind them, I think. And a lot of, I mean, pure journalist is very proud of, you know, reporting the facts and, you know, getting across, you know, it's kind of a public service, you know, they call it the fourth estate. You're, you know, keeping checks and balances on government and all of that. And it's a really like noble profession where it's seen that way, or used to be anyway. And I think marketing is seen really differently, obviously, where you're working for a brand or a company and you're just, I mean, I'd say marketing has changed a lot to be a lot more about content and storytelling, like we're talking about, and a lot more about content creation. But more traditionally, it was more about using whatever tactics needed to bring people into the doors of your business, that didn't in the past was not so reliant on content, I think, nowadays. And I think that has to do with like the shift we've seen in the media landscape, and the business model of publications in general, and obviously the rise of the internet. Because yeah, I think like marketers used to be reliant on media outlets for advertising, so that meant that content was really separate from from marketing. Basically, they were two separate things. People did marketing in publications, but it was in a separate section. It was advertising. Advertising was very separate from the content. Now it's all mixed up. And a lot of brands are investing less in advertising and investing more in creating their own content, because they don't need publications to reach their audiences. They can just publish directly in their own blogs, or publications. I mean, a lot of companies, I mean, even historically, content marketing has existed with things like the Michelin Guide and stuff like that. That's, you know, print publications that are created by brands, but there was a barrier to entry, and it was like costly to do that back then. Now anyone can create their own publication pretty easily, and so practically every brand is doing it. So the field of content marketing has just exploded. Even very small companies are doing it. So now everyone needs journalist profiles, basically, if they want to create content that's anywhere near what like a professional publication would make. So
I think that's the big difference that I've seen. That I notice. I'm not a journalist, although I do work with an electronics magazine on a regular basis. So we create articles about products and how technology is used and that sort of thing. So it's not the same sort of journalism as one would can have in their mind with respect to, say, newspapers. And I think as an outsider, you see a journalist as somebody who's searching for the truth, going through lots of different sources in order to pull those together to say, look, this is what's happening in your community, this is what's happening in your environment. And you know, you are then allowed to make your own opinion on the situation based upon that. Whereas the marketing work, at least that I do, and especially the text-based marketing that I create, it's similar. We do research, we look at all the different sources, but obviously what we're trying to project then is a message to build trust maybe in a particular vendor and say, look, you know, we know all these things and they're good for these types of markets and fulfilling these types of applications. And hey, by the way, we're actually very experienced in this particular tool, this particular platform or software, take a look at us and we can help you. I'm going to ask you a question, and while you answer it, I'm just going to nip off because I've just realised I've not plugged in my laptop, so the battery's going to die very shortly. So do you see it in the same way? And also with the content marketers you're working with, are they, when they move from journalism, does it, is it a bit of a struggle to get away from that sort of truth searching element of the work?
Yeah, that's a good question because the nature of the things you write about tends to be different, but I do think it really depends on the brand or the company that you're working for. So, I mean, I think the best content marketers are doing what could be considered journalism, or at least well-researched, well-written content. So, and personally, I mean, in my most recent job, I was as a journalist, I was a business writer. I also was like a freelancer later and mostly wrote about business topics. So it's a little, for me, it wasn't such like a crazy transition because I was writing about businesses, but like from an outside perspective. Now I'm writing about businesses from the inside and how they work. And I think, well, when I write, like I said, I'm not writing as much as I used to, but yeah. But personally, I've always been the kind of person who can get really interested in like pretty much any topic. And I think that's like a characteristic of journalists in general, is like we tend to be curious. And so I think if you can get really into it and get interested in the topic, you're going to create content that's interesting for your audiences. And obviously that's what the brands want too. They want curious people who are going to come up with interesting stuff that their audiences are going to be interested in.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is very interesting because that element of curiosity today, marketing and creativity seem to be sometimes even forgotten. I mean, there's a lot of analytics and all the post-mortem of campaigns to validate how many people have been there and what's the impact. And this is the same with journalism. I mean, publications have been looking at their circulation and the number of people that have been reading the articles and things like this. So in fact, there are a lot of parallels there. And this brings another dimension into the talk of marketers and journalists, is the networking part. I mean, in fact, originally, for the ones watching the program right now, we started the discussion with Shaheen about talking about how to manage networks, because marketing is heavily reliable and relies heavily on networks. And so does journalism. I mean, journalism, people have sources, not only from gathering the information, but also for positioning the information out. And marketing is very much into the same direction, having sources to be able to create content and positioning it out to different channels and conduits to the audiences. Is there something, I mean, is there something there also as a parallel, Shaheen, that would work into maybe lessons learned from journalism and how to apply them to marketing on networking?
Yeah, well, actually, I started to allude to that a little bit before, but yeah, it's a good point that this part of sourcing in journalism is obviously a huge part of the job. And when you're a journalist, one advantage is that like a lot of people want to talk to you, so it's really easy to do networking in a way. Since it's like probably like half of your job is just like finding the right contacts where you can get information to write the stories you need to write. So you spend a lot of time doing that. So you do like learn a lot about, okay, what's the most efficient way to network, how to spend your time in a way where you're going to make the right contacts and spend your time on people who are going to introduce you to even more of the right kinds of people and things like that. So it's really been, it was a great school in that sense for both my work in marketing and as obviously networking is essential for like every aspect of business pretty much. But definitely as a marketer or as an entrepreneur in general, it's a little, or if you're doing anything related to sales, I would say it's a little, networking is even more challenging because you're, whereas I guess as a journalist, you're giving people something they want a lot of times, which is exposure. As a salesperson, you have to convince them that it's what they want, right? So that they should want to talk to you. So the dynamic is a little bit different, but a lot of the tactics I think that work in journalism also work for other types of networking.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
I think the role of a marketer in an organization is similar when it comes to finding sources. I think in order to create good content for your website and also for articles and white papers and so on, you need to know who in your organization knows what and what's. It's important to have those contacts within your own organization to understand, okay, what can we do and how quickly can we turn it around in order to be timely in your response. Now, you also work with a lot of content creators through VeraContent. Do you also see a lot of journalists coming into that environment and wanting to engage with people in marketing? And are there challenges? What are the challenges of a journalism environment and into a corporate marketing environment?
Yeah, well, definitely at Vera, we like look for journalism experience for all of like the writers that we work with. So we're an agency, we're like 14 people based in Madrid, like I said. And but we work with like a huge network of freelance writers. So I mean, both for the project managers on our team who kind of are the editors and the ones overseeing the projects, as well as like the freelancers we work with. I mean, we love to work with people who have experience in journalism or different types of writing that are relevant to the kinds of content we're producing for clients. And I would say, like in general, people adapt pretty well to working on more corporate kind of content or more marketing geared content. And yeah, I don't know. It's I don't think I don't think it's a huge stretch. Like I think it's actually for a lot of journalists who have it's seen as easier in a way. Because
Less
I
effort
mean,
required.
yeah, because it's oftentimes the sources that you're going to use are like defined in advance. You know, and a lot of what you're writing is like educational, informative, or so it's not as difficult to like do the part of like getting the scoop, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's not as research intensive oftentimes. But and I did want to say also on the previous point we were talking about is like the whole thing about building trust. I think that, and when we're talking about networking, like I was saying how when you're a journalist, everyone a lot of times wants to talk to you, but as a marketer, I think you can obviously use content marketing as a tool for that as well. Because, I mean, you probably know that as hosts of a podcast and everything, but I mean, when you're publishing and putting stuff out there, and you can interview people, you can feature different people in your publications. It is a chance to like, it really helps with networking and getting to know people in your industry and things like that. And obviously that's part of what we've been doing with our whole content mix initiative as well. I mean, it's been a big initiative to get to know people all across Europe working in content marketing, providing stuff, content that's of value to them, and at the same time, benefiting from being part of this community that we've created. So, yeah.
Indeed. And this is interesting. I mean, with the rise of social media over the last many years now, we see more and more that social media is the conduit for information for people, not just only to share what they do, but also to gather their news from. And I mean, it has created problems around the world in some cases, people getting the wrong sets of information about something. And I don't want to go into the details about that, but it feels like from a journalistic standpoint, that using social media as a platform for sharing the stories and the information that journalists do is in fact less of a stretch than it might have been for marketing to go and basically develop a new strategy for using audio and video and social media. Because for broadcasts like we're doing today, for journalists, it is native. It is in their blood, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing where marketing has come to a audio, video, podcasts, social media mode, and in fact, the medias and journalism has been there already before. It's just that it has moved from the TV screen to the mobile device. But bottom line, I mean, this is still the same. So to me, I'm really wondering who had the biggest learning curve here. Is it the journalist or is it the marketer? And I would probably say it's probably the marketer.
Mhm. I don't know, I think both are learning from each other at this point. Also on the journalism side, even though traditional media organizations were really good at like creating the content in the first place, they weren't so good at promoting it, and I think they've learned a lot promoting it online because it's like a whole different thing. And obviously, marketers are really cutting edge at that. So I think
True.
that I mean companies in the marketing profession is just investing a lot in learning all the tricks and the algorithms and everything from the beginning, where traditional media has always been more focused on creating great content, and then, okay, how do we get this in front of more people was kind of secondary, I think, at the beginning. Obviously now, I mean, the landscape's changed a lot, but I think they have learned a lot from each other. And yeah, I know that when I was working in newspapers in the early days, it was, you know, there was a lot of discussions about using what are considered best practices for SEO and things like that if it was at the expense of like telling the story in the most pure way, I guess. I don't know. There's like a bit of a compromise you have to make there. And with using catchy titles and things like that, you don't want to be a tabloid, but at the same time, nobody's going to click on it if you
Not halfway
don't write them.
interesting.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
In print, you could get away with a lot more like artistic titles, for example, that you can't do online. So it's been a learning curve for sure for journalists as well, I think.
Yeah.
So very true.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges of writing articles at all in a journalistic environment is the fact that, as you say, because of SEO and being relevant, you need to make sure your keywords are in there so that it can be found by someone who's looking for it. And also, then the title also has to sometimes be simplified because something clever and funny it just doesn't make sense from a search point of view, which is a real shame because it loses some of its character at that point. But
Absolutely.
one of the things I was wondering, especially with respect to VeraContent and you interfacing between the marketing world and content creators, what's it been like over the past 12 months with COVID? We've seen, at least from and also from some of the people we've spoken to on the show over the last few months, is that COVID has really sort of focused minds and made people sort of focus on getting their content out themselves, because it's the only way of actually interfacing with the world outside, because people can't travel, salespeople can't go to meetings, and we can't go to conferences. So have you also seen a big upturn in interest in content creation?
Yeah, definitely. We're a boutique agency, so we're like a very limited sample size, I would say. But from our experience, like definitely we've like all of our clients, except for ones that were maybe in very impacted industries that were hesitant to invest, but pretty much across the board, people were investing more in content marketing by the end of last year, because obviously you couldn't do a lot of other types of marketing. So yeah, people really were doubling down on producing more content and betting more on that channel for sure, as well as I'm sure other types of online marketing events and things like that. Yeah, there's been a big increase.
When it comes to marketing, I mean, you have like a foot into both worlds, and that's the beauty of it, right? And you can really bridge the two. Do you see into your network of journalists, people that are starting to migrate from journalism and working more into, I'm going to say, the back room of the marketing company, or vice versa?
I mean, definitely there's been a huge shift from people working for media organizations to working for brands, like over the past 10 years or so, probably. Because, I mean, the traditional media used to, I think, well, they used to have much larger teams, basically, and a lot of them have downsized in order to compete with like other, I guess, other online publications that had a lot lower costs. So yeah, I mean, like the newspaper that I worked for, I don't know, they're probably, I don't even know what percentage of the stuff they're down to now, but I mean, I don't know, it was like a couple hundred people on the editorial staff when I worked there, and I think now it's less than, I mean, I shouldn't say, but less than 100 for sure. So, and I mean, and the big office that we had is now like a, you know, hot desk situation. So, I mean, I think, I mean, most of my coworkers are now doing other things, like the people I worked with then, because I mean, they also hired a lot more entry-level people, and I think that's something that happened across the board, that like those traditional media organizations that were, you know, had really big expenses with very experienced journalists, it just doesn't make sense anymore, that business model. And so that means fewer jobs for journalists at those kinds of organizations, but obviously a lot more jobs in marketing. So that's why so many people have made the switch.
Yeah.
So,
It's a shame, really, isn't it? I think it's a loss almost for the journalism industry and the press in general. But I was reading on LinkedIn over the past week, a lot of people have been posting about who to employ in a marketing organization, and there was a lot of people sort of saying, well, should I employ somebody who's a marketer who's trained in marketing, or should I and then sort of get them to become a good writer to provide content? Or is it better to go down the road of employing someone who's maybe got a journalism background and teaching them to become a marketer and give them the skills they need? And the comments that I read on those particular posts, they were basically saying better to employ the content creator, because it's easier to teach them to become a marketer than teach a marketer to write content. Do you see it in the same way as well? Would that be your recommended course of action?
Well, really depends on the role and like the size of the department and all that kind of thing. Because I think obviously they are very different skill sets. I mean, ideally it would be someone who's done journalism but has some marketing experience at least, because they're really different jobs actually. So, and I think while writing is a big part, I mean, like if I absolutely had to choose someone like as a only a marketing profile or a journalist profile for a marketing role, I think I would probably still go with the marketing profile, assuming that they can work with like really good writers and that they have judgment to choose good writers. But but I mean, yeah, it depends on a lot of things. Like I think every marketing department, it's ideal to have at least one person with the journalism profile there. But there's so much strategy. It's so marketing to be in charge of that department, obviously, like you need to understand business strategy and marketing at a higher level. So I think a writer probably isn't going to cut it. So I don't know. You got.
And I mean,
So,
Stuart, you've been doing technical content creation. And are you coming from a journalist background?
Not at all. No, I fell into it really just through encouragement by various marketing people I'd worked with over the years, and they said, you know, we like what you write. Could you write some more? So that was really good. But I see Shaheen's point as well.
That said, I did do I led a marketing department with no marketing experience.
There you go.
Personally, at a startup. I mean, and I had done an MBA, so I'd studied marketing. So I was a journalist. I did an MBA. I had an interest in it. So I think that helps if you have an interest in it and you want to learn. Having that background as a journalist and being a great communicator goes a really long way in a marketing role. So it helped me a lot. I probably wasn't the perfect profile for that role, but I guess if you're a startup and you have to choose, obviously you want someone who has a little bit of both, an interest in both at least. Yeah.
I mean, we keep saying content is king, right? I mean, we keep saying that unless there's interesting content, what's the point creating anything with marketing? And so this is where the creativity comes from. Time is flying by, and we're already at the end of the program today. But I think this is, I think it's really fantastic to understand the parallels between journalism and marketing, how they complement each other from the standpoint of using the content, creating the content, and understanding how to manage the networks behind that. This is a powerful way for companies to, in fact, have that core of knowledge into their marketing team. Shaheen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. And could I just request that we bring up my little contact slide? Is that
Yes,
possible?
absolutely. We're going to put your contact information back on as we are closing on the episode. Stuart, this is, I think, a perfect closure about managing networks, right? Putting the content information back on the screen, making sure that VeraContent and Shaheen has it, and pass it on.
Yeah, you can see there
Exactly.
all our social handles and email. If anyone would like to get in contact with me or learn about more what we do at the Content Mix of our content, definitely get in touch.
Absolutely. Stuart, another fantastic episode. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me again. And I think we've learned a lot about about what journalists do and how we can leverage some of that in the marketing era. I totally believe that there's a lot to learn, and it's
Indeed.
probably time that we started to focus a little bit more on that and use that as part of our content creation strategy and learning about how to work with sources and research things well.
Yeah. So, and that's the Creative Minds. We continue with another episode in 2 weeks. Subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and on Vimeo and YouTube. So you have all the information about everything that can be thought about around marketing. Thank you very much for joining. Talk to you soon.